Welcome to Launch Your Podcast, the beginner's guide to podcasting. I am Samuel Adie, the chief troublemaker at Podlobe, and your guide for this course. Module 1, Introduction into Podcasting. But before we go into this module for today, I'm so excited, first of all, that you are making this decision to podcast. Like I said in the introductory video, this is probably the best decision you're making right now for yourself, for your brand, or for your business. At the end of this module, you should be able to do all of the following. 1, explain what podcasting is. 2, understand the key terms often used with podcasting. 3, list the qualities that makes it a podcast. 4, explain the common misconceptions about podcasting. 5, identify what podcasting can help you achieve. And lastly, 6, understand the legal and copyright issues with podcasting. So what exactly is podcasting? The term podcasting is derived from Apple's iPod and the word broadcasting. Podcasting is basically the process of delivering content over the internet directly to a listener's computer or portable device for later listening, using one very, very important code called RSS feeds. Now, the term is no longer specifically related to iPod, but refers to any software and hardware combination that permits recording and automatic downloading of audio files, mostly in MP3 format, for listening at the user's convenience. Now, a lot of people mix it up with radio. Podcasting is different from radio in 3 key ways. 1, control. While radio would not give you control over the time of airing, podcasting gives you control over how you listen, when you listen, and where you listen to it. All those things that are heavily restricted with radio. 2, it gives you flexibility. You could be listening to podcasting wherever you want it to be. You could be jogging, but most of your programs that you would like to listen to on radio might not come very early in the morning when you're jogging, might not come late in the night when you're about to sleep, might not come on a Saturday morning when you're trying to do a course. So podcasting gives a listener a lot of flexibility. And then the choice of content is also very important. You can pick an area and find a podcast about it and listen to it all day. So the content for podcasting is a lot more specific, valuable, and coincides than content you get from radio. Now, there are certain key terms that are important with podcasting, and one of those key terms is podcast. So I defined what podcasting is earlier on, explained what it is, but now I'm about to explain to you what podcast itself is. So a podcast is a digital media file or a series of such files that is distributed over the internet using syndication feeds for playback on portable media players and personal computers. Now, let me give you time to take that in. First of all, it's a digital media file or a series of such files that is distributed over the internet using syndication feeds for playback on portable media players or personal computers or even mobile devices. The second term is RSS feeds. Now, what RSS means is real simple syndicate. It's as simple as that. They're just small computer codes that allows you get notified or allows your listeners get notified when a new podcast is released. The third key term is episode. That's like an English term, so everyone should know what an episode is. So it's just an individual media file containing an RSS feed. So if you've been listening to podcasts, or probably Switch podcast or Razor podcast from Podlobe, you would hear us say episode 1, episode 2, or tag to each individual media file is what you call an episode. The fourth term is podcast directory. Now, a podcast directory is simply an equivalent of search engines, of website search engines. Their function is basically to catalog podcasts and help you find one when you're looking for it. As with search engines, all they do not catalog the same number of podcasts, I beg your pardon. And if you're hosting a podcast and you don't submit your feed to this directory, you're never going to find your podcast on that directory. So the most popular directory out there is iTunes. There are others like Stitcher, Zone, BlackBerry Podcast, Google Podcast. There's so many directories out there. Blueberry, I think Libsyn has a directory too. So directory is basically what you can call it the Google for podcasting. Now, what makes it a podcast? Now, there are certain qualities. People most times mix up what a podcast is with audio file. Sometimes I get the question as, what makes an audio file a podcast? And some people send me audio file and call it podcast. I'm like, technically, it's not a podcast. So what exactly makes it a podcast? There are 6 things that makes an audio file or a media file a podcast. First of all, it is a media file. So a podcast could be audio, video, text, or even EPUB files. But these days, video files are just referred to as YouTube videos. Text podcast are referred to as blogging. And forget EPUB files. I don't even know what that is. But the audio aspect of things is really settled in with the word podcasting. There are a lot of videos out there, and because of YouTube, the brand of YouTube, it overshadows you calling a video a vidcast or a podcast. So basically, the media file most days refers to the audio file. 2, it's an internet thing. Basically, it has everything to do with the internet. So if it is not on the internet, it is not a podcast. The podcast is always uploaded to the internet. Now you see how different it is from radio. 3, it is released on a regular basis. It has to have a specific day, frequency of release. It could be daily, weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly. So if it is done irregularly, it's not a podcast. Again, a podcast is not broadcasted live, technically. It's different from a teleseminar, a webinar, or a radio show. The strength of podcasting is not in coming out live. It is in recording and releasing it out onto the internet and allowing your listeners to choose I can choose to download a podcast that was released yesterday in 2018. That's why it is called a podcast. To the 4th one, it has RSS feeds. Like I said earlier, RSS feeds are just small computer codes that allows you to get notified when a podcast is released. It is that small subscribe button that if you click would alert you when a new episode is released. The 5th one is it can be downloaded or streamed online. Podcast gives you complete control over how you listen to the content. So you can either choose to download and listen to it later or stream it live on the website or the mobile application. The last one is the portable media player is involved. You don't need an iPhone or an iPod to listen to a podcast anymore. All you need is a smartphone, your computer, or any portable device connected to the internet. Now, there are common misconceptions about podcasting. Some of them are already addressed in previous sections of this module, but there are 3 major ones that I like to cover here again. The very first one is you need an iPod to listen to a podcast. Not anymore. You do not need an iPod or an iPhone to listen to a podcast. Your Android device is a podcast listener. All you need to do is go to your Google Play Store and download a podcast app. It could be Podcast Addict. It could be Podcast Republic. I use Podcast Addict or Podcast. Lately, I've been using Podcast Addict, but Podcast Republic is a very, very great application too that allows you to listen to a podcast. You don't need an iPod to listen to a podcast. Two, a podcast is like live radio. Hell no. It is not like radio. Podcast is not a real-time broadcast. I hope that's clear enough. It's different from radio in so many ways. In fact, the only thing similar between them is the fact that they are both audio. They're different in the following ways. One, medium of transmission. Radio works on frequency. Podcast works with the internet. Yes, some radios now have their broadcasts online, but the primary medium is still the radio set. Two, timing. A broadcast is a radio broadcast, I beg your pardon, is a real-time broadcast, while a podcast is not. You miss a radio show, and that's most times the end. But with a podcast, you can always go back and download it anytime you want. The third one is the content. The radio follows strict broadcasting rules and regulations, which are not applicable with podcasting. With a podcast, there's a greater degree of flexibility and freedom that comes with your content. The third one is you have to pay to subscribe to a podcast. No. Like, seriously, no. Podcasting is free to all subscribe. I mean, podcast content. It's free to all subscribers. All you need is your bandwidth to download episodes. We don't ask listeners to pay to get updates from us. Maybe that's some different form of revenue model later on in future, but for now, you don't have to pay to listen to podcast. So, what exactly can podcasting help you achieve? First of all, it helps you create a closer connection with the people you want. This is the beauty of podcasting in its purest form. Podcasting allows you to create a closer connection with your listeners that transcends time and space. Time in the context of the fact that the content of most podcasts are evergreen. So when I was trying to learn how to podcast work from Cliff Ravenscraft, he had recorded the audio, he recorded the videos in 2006. And 8 years, is it 2006, 2007? Probably 8 years or 7 years later, I was watching the video. 8 years, 7 years later, I'm listening to his episode 2, his episode 3, and every single content he released was still relevant in 2014 and 2015. So it transcends time, it transcends space. There is no way I would have met all of the podcasters I listen to right now if I had to meet them physically. Some of them are far away in Australia, and I'm still able to connect with them because of their content. Its style and medium of disseminating information, the voice, contributes to this uniqueness. It's magical because you're in the head of your listener when he or she plugs the earphone and hits play. No medium affords you such surreal access and connection with people. In Nigeria today, many people are looking for that kind of content, and they're waiting for you to produce a podcast on something that relates with them, and something that or strikes a chord with them. And as a result of this, podcasting in Nigeria is not only going to be unique, but also going to be very fulfilling. Two, it makes you an authority in the eyes of your listener. Have you ever been to an event where a speaker talks about a field and you immediately know that he has no idea what they're saying? Most times, there is how you come to that conclusion. One, through his voice, and ends his message. If he's jittery about his message, or if you think, or if you know too much than he knows, his voice would show it. His demeanor and looks. Now, the latter can be very misleading because you can find someone who's not probably well dressed in your mind. And when he opens his mouth to speak, he's dishing out the real content. Now, podcasting takes care of that by removing that looks aspect of it. So you can only judge people by the content of their voice. Now, people can easily sense confidence in your voice when you talk. Compare someone who is talking about giving people tips on how to live an healthy life and owns a gym to someone who owns a gym and never talks about it? Who would you respect more? So when you podcast more often, people begin to respect you. You begin to gain credibility in the ears of your listeners who will tell other people to listen to your podcast. And before you know it, you're a thought leader in that niche you're podcasting about. Three, it can help you turn your customers into loyal fans and generate new leads for your business. Now, for those people who are podcasting because of their business, it's a bit easier because your podcast name is mostly settled, your content, your vision, they all align to what you're trying to achieve with your business. Now, when you podcast is not about, hey, this is my product, buy it. Podcast is about, hey, I do this, I produce this, I am this. I can help you with all the other problems you're facing without charging you. So you come out as someone who is genuinely ready to help people. And when people see this, your customers begin to connect with you on a more personal level. We all know that marketing has a lot of emotional undertone. And when you begin to hit the right chord in the subconscious of your listener and the subconsciousness of your of whoever is listening, you're striking a personal chord with them. Now, say you started a business and most times people don't understand where you're coming from. When you podcast, you tell them deep stories about yourself. You show how vulnerable you can be, though you have to do that with your senses. You would be able to create a closer connection, which leads us back to the very first one. And once you can create that connection, people can begin to trust you because now they know you, they can trust you, now they like you, it's easier for you to sell to them. And it also generates new leads. People who are not listening to you because of your product or services can now know what you sell and what you offer. The fourth one is it puts your listener in the driving seat. It makes them feel like they're in control of their life. It gives them control over when, how, and where they listen to you. Now, have you ever tried to watch a video and you feel like Cliff Ravenscraft would say, like you feel very bad about it? Like you feel you could probably be using that time doing something else. Or you wake up one Saturday morning and you're watching a video and you know you should be doing other things or doing chores. Video is probably the most selfish medium of information dissemination out there. It's the most selfish because it tells you, hey, give me all of your time, concentrate on me. But with audio, it tells you, okay, continue what you're doing. I'm going to be here with you. Nothing stops you from learning a new language while you're trying to do that core. It is selfless and it puts your listener in the driving seat. The fifth one is, yeah, it can help you generate another source of income. I don't pitch this when I try to teach people to podcast because with podcasting, it takes a while for you to be able to generate any sensible revenue. At this point in time, you could look at it from one perspective. One perspective is at this point in time, there are no Nigerian podcaster who is making a lot of money from podcasting in Nigeria. It's just beginning to gather momentum in the nation. So on one side of it, it's an opportunity for you to key in and join that first train. And another side of it, you might think is not profitable, but that's not the basics of podcasting. Monetary compensations or monetary value comes after you have created a closer connection. There's so many things that has happened to me that are not monetary, but they came as a result of building a closer connection with people. People can just call you up one day. You're podcasting on a niche topic and someone is listening to it and they're inviting you for events. They're calling you as a consultant to talk about something. The possibility is endless with podcasting. But at the end of the day, after a while, it would help you generate another source of income. Now, the last aspect of this model is discussing the legal and copyright issues with podcasting. Now, Now, podcasting, unlike broadcasting, are not subjected to direct censorship or regulatory controls. However, media content on the internet are usually copyrighted and associated with terms of use and laws of defamation. So, when I was going to launch a podcast in the very beginning, I would play other people's song when I was releasing the what would I call it? Beg your pardon. When I was releasing the audio files on WhatsApp, I would play other people's song in the background and send to people. I could have been sued for that if I was doing that for monetary gains. I could have been sued for that. So you can't just go over and download the band song, a Wizkid song, an Olamide song, a Timi Dakolo song, any of your favorite musician, and say you want to use the song in your podcast. You could get sued for that. Maybe not now. They will just keep quiet and watch because, yeah, it's harmless. But say you eat it big with podcasting. There's savage around that are ready to pounce on you. So don't go downloading people's song and using it in your podcast without their express permission. You also don't want to go online and just read a blog content and come to your podcast and dish it out to people like it's your own content. Courtesy demands and even law demands that you acknowledge your source. So you say, okay, I read an article over so and so blog, and that is the basics of my discussion today. You don't even want to be reading the content. You want to talk about it in the context of your own understanding. If you notice when we talk and Switch podcast, after the end of the content in Switch podcast, we acknowledge the fact that we got our sound from either bent sound or smart sound. It is just it's the right thing to do. So learn to acknowledge your content, all the content in your podcast that are not yours. Try as much as possible to ensure they're not infringing on anyone's right. And you would be fine. And another thing is when you're interviewing people, let them know you'll be using their audio as part of the content. It is very, very, very important. Now that brings us to the end of this model. But before we go, I'd like to tell you a story. Tunde knew one day he would run his own business, but he has always felt it was too young to start one now. Tunde, you're just in 300 level. How would you get the necessary resources to set up your business? Wait till you get out of school, man, were the common responses he got from friends and family. As Tunde rode in the school cab to get to school, he went through his Facebook page where he came across a post about an audio interview with an entrepreneur who started his business in school. Oh, they've come again with these American stories that don't work here in Nigeria. But when the same message popped up on Twitter, Tunde realized that this entrepreneur was Nigerian. In fact, Chukwuemeka was his name in particular. Seeing this, he decided to subscribe to the podcast. As Tunde began to listen with rapt attention, he was surprised that Chukwuemeka was only in 200 level when he started his own business. Tunde was so authentic thanks to his headphone that his friend had to tap him when they got to their bus stop. At the end of the week, he had downloaded more podcasts that enlightened him and opened his mind to possibilities. He realized that all he needed to do was to start. He decided to contact the team, asking questions about starting up a business. The team directed his questions to the people who could answer. And by the end of the month, Tunde had taken a very big step to starting his own tailoring business. That, my friend, is just one of the many powers of podcasting. And the second module, we will be taking a look at your podcast workflow and structure of a podcast episode. I remain Samuel Aderi, the chief troublemaker at Podlobe.